Can you please explain which event was the official declaration that Britain is no longer a superpower? Well, there's no official declaration as such, but I understand what you're asking. So it happened in stages. The Second World War, well, Britain was isolated. The whole of Europe had fallen to the Third Reich. France had fallen. You had the Vichy regime in France, the puppet regime, which was actually a Nazi puppet regime, and the rest of Europe had fallen to the Nazis. And there was the Battle of Britain. The Nazis were trying to hammer Britain into the dust. So Britain was under siege, and without American help, they would have gone under. And of course, American help isn't free. The Americans loaned whatever they did to Britain, and Britain had to repay that. And Britain was repaying the debt to the Americans until the beginning of the 21st century, this century, until not so long ago. That's how much debt the British owed the Americans. So the Americans, whatever help they offered it at a price. So that itself was complete humiliation of the British. What imperial status? There was no imperial status once that happens. So that you could say was unofficial death knell of the British Empire. The British Empire was no longer a superpower. It was no longer an empire. It was just an island under siege. That's what Hitler had reduced Britain to. And the Americans magnanimously helped Britain out. So Britain essentially was in a subsidiary position. Simple as that. But if you want a real official, I mean, declaration to the world that hey, it's over for you guys. It's over for the British. The days of empire are over. Well, for that you would have to go back to 1956. 1956, the Suez Crisis. Let's go to the map once again. The Suez Crisis. Suez. So where is Suez? Let's go west of India and let's go to Egypt. So when you go to Egypt, you will see that between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean Sea, there's this piece of land which connects Africa with Asia. But if you look closer, there is a canal which starts from Suez, Al Suez, and there's this great bitter lake here, this Timsah Lake. And if you go further north, you reach Port Said, where the canal opens up into the Mediterranean Sea. This is the Suez Canal. And the British essentially were major stakeholders in the Suez Canal. There was a point in time when the Suez Canal was called the spinal cord, essentially, of the British Empire, because it is what enabled the British to reach India fast, because India was their major possession during colonial times. And even after the Second World War, the British were major stakeholders in the Suez Canal, and so were the French. So the British and the French were major stakeholders in the Suez Canal. Okay, now what happens? What happens now is that somewhere in the 1950s, probably around 1956, Nasser, who was the ruler of Egypt, he decided to nationalize the Suez Canal. What does it mean that it was nationalized? It means that the government of Egypt bought out the shares. It did not simply confiscate the Suez Canal and take it by force. It paid the shareholders whatever they were owed and took control of the Suez Canal. So the British and the French lost control of the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal became entirely controlled by the Egyptian government. And in response to that, the British and the French, they hatched a conspiracy together. They launched a maritime invasion of Egypt, and they landed in Port Said and took control of Port Said. This happened probably in October or somewhere around that time, 1956. And the USSR, which was on good terms with Egypt, it protested. The Americans also protested. And then the Americans took the French and the British to task, not militarily, but diplomatically. Okay. They took the French and the British to the diplomatic negotiating table, twisted their arms until the arms were all the way around like that. Arm twisted the British and the French. And within a few days, by December or something around that time, the British and the French withdrew from Port Said, and the attempt to take Suez was over. That was humiliation. It was a public slap in the face of both the British and the French. So that was unambiguous assertion to the entire world that Britain is now a second rate world power. It's forget about being a superpower and an empire. It's not even a first rate world power. It's now, well, not it wasn't a vassal of the US at the time, but it was humiliated by the US, and the French were too. And let's not forget Israel's role in this. So the invasion was a joint invasion, not just by the British and the French, but also by Israel. So British, French, and Israeli troops invaded, and the Israelis were persuaded by the Americans to withdraw, and the British and the French were arm twisted into withdrawing. So that, you could say, was that was the day that the world understood that Britain's the imperial days are long gone, and Britain is now not even a first rate world power; it's a second rate world power. And once Tony Blair came to power, it became a US poodle, a US vassal, and that's when it became a third rate world power.